Hello and welcome to Seeing Red. I'm Mark, and this week I am joined by the one and only Grace from Red Rum. Grace, welcome.
Hi Mark, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited. I literally, a genuinely fangirl moment. I listen to the show every week.
Get out of it.
No, I'm so serious. My partner said to me the other day, I said, oh, I'm doing a collaboration with Mark from Seeing Red. And he was like, you listen to that one all the time. I was like, yes, I do. I know, so there you go.
Tell us a bit about Red Rum, because it's got massive, hasn't it, your podcast? You're on YouTube as well, aren't you?
Yeah, so I started it in the pandemic, lost all my other work and just thought, so interested in true crime. And when I started it, I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts that I kind of wanted more information on the victim. So that is kind of how Red Rum started. And I hope I've continued that, where I'm really trying to be as victim focused as possible and kind of dig into the details of those people's lives. And then have been doing it for, I guess, 5 years now. And then started it on YouTube a couple of years ago. And that, you know how it is, like the YouTube algorithm is a bit mad. So it gives you like massive spurts and then massive nothings. But it's the same episodes that I'm putting out on the podcast. So it's nice to like practice that skill as well, I think, of like how to do the video. But yeah, so into its 5th year now.
Yeah, and 6+ million downloads, is that right?
Just hit the 6 million mark.
So yeah, do check out Red Rum. If you're not already a fan, hopefully you listen to it. If you're not a fan, check it out. It's available everywhere, isn't it? Including YouTube, as you said. Okay, so you know nothing about the 2 cases that I'm going to be talking about today, Grace, which is how me and Bethan do it. So this should be a very familiar kind of episode for our listeners. I've been solo for the past, I don't know, probably month or 2. We had some pre-recorded ones that we'd done together. But yeah, since Bethan's had her baby and been off for a couple of months, I've been doing it solo, and I don't know how you guys do it. It must be, you're putting out 2 episodes a week, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit much. I was up till about 11 p.m. last night on a Sunday night.
That's not good.
No, it was not fun. But I've just started doing collaboration episodes as well, just the odd one here and there. And I would say the same to you. I don't know how you guys do it because the other person can ask any question and you have to be able to know the case so inside out that even if you don't have a comprehensive exact answer, you need to be able to talk around the subject. So I think what you guys do in terms of like 2 hosts, I think is incredible, and it's definitely a skill I'm like slowly getting to grips with.
There's no sort of easy answer to podcasting. I think it's it's so enjoyable, and we do it because we're so fascinated with the subject matter. But yeah, there is a lot of work behind the scenes. But I won't bore everybody with that because nobody wants to hear that. So this week we are heading back to 1989 as we take a look at 2 chilling cases from that year. So the cases aren't related to each other, they're completely separate. They occurred 7 months and 55 miles apart, but there is one common denominator. Both cases featured on BBC's Crime Watch, with dramatic reconstructions being shown that year, accompanied by appeals to the public for information. Are you aware of Crime Watch, Grace? I just saw your email address. I won't say what it is, but I can see what year you were probably born in. So I'm guessing not first time round, maybe, but have you seen old episodes on YouTube?
Yeah, so I remember when I was growing up, I think it was still on a little bit. So I remember it being really scary because of the subject matter, I suppose, and I was really young. I do remember it a little bit. But certainly as I've gotten older, especially researching cases, going back and watching those Crime Watch episodes, and what I really love about them is that liveness of like when you were watching it at the time, you actually could help solve a crime. I think that's what makes it so engaging. And then now there's a certain nostalgia with watching back. Has it finished now then? Is it no longer on?
It's no longer on in its usual historic kind of format. I think they do, I don't know, some kind of Crime Watch Roadshow, I think, which is sometimes on the BBC in a morning, but it's quite different to what used to be on. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason I watch it too. It's for that nostalgia, particularly being someone who was born in the relatively early 80s. For me, the 80s and 90s, it just typifies it and sums it up so perfectly, with the reconstructions as well. So yeah, I'm a massive fan. If anybody wants to check out any old episodes of Crime Watch, then head to Redcard74's channel. He or she has got pretty much all of them, and they're really good quality. So that's a real source for all of us in the true crime community, I think. Our first case then takes us to Royal Tunbridge Wells. The town earned its royal prefix in 1909 when King Edward VII recognised its long-standing association with royalty, a tradition dating back to the 17th century when Queen Henrietta Maria visited the town after the discovery of the Chalybeate Spring. This natural mineral spring bubbles up iron-rich water to this very day. The water is known for its metallic taste and for leaving an orangey-brown stain on the stone that it springs from. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the spring was believed by local people to have healing powers, and it quickly transformed the area into a fashionable health resort that drew royalty, aristocrats and high society. And it was this spring and the allure that it created that laid the foundations for Tunbridge Wells as a spa town. By 1989, Tunbridge Wells still exuded prosperity, but beneath its orderly streets lay a quieter, more middle-class world. A world in which one wicked man was keeping a vile secret. And I say one wicked man, there were at least two, actually, at this time, two vile men keeping vile secrets, because of course David Fuller was living in Tunbridge Wells in 1989 too. The term Lover's Lane refers to a secluded spot where couples find privacy for romantic encounters. The Oxford English Dictionary traces the phrase back to 1853. Lovers' lanes are scattered across the UK. There's probably one not far from you, whether you realise it or not. They are typically discreet, tucked-away lanes in the countryside, shielded from prying eyes, though they aren't always lanes. Sometimes they're car parks, lay-bys, or patches of wasteland, and on any given night you're likely to find a courting couple or two locked in a passionate embrace at any one of these locations.
So I feel like this must still be a thing, right? But when I think of a lover's lane, I think of like the 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s. But now I'm like, do kids still do that? But I guess they do because they live with their parents.
Think
so
yeah. I can't see that it's moved on because that age-old problem of perhaps wanting to be intimate or having some privacy with a partner and you're 17, 18, still live at home, there is nowhere to go. I do kind of think a lot of those locations have been taken over by doggers now, but I don't know. So they must still exist, and sometimes they're even called Lover's Lane. You will see that title for the lane. In popular culture, the concept of lovers' lanes is often regarded as titillating, maybe even kinky, if you've led a bit of a shielded life. For some, the thrill of public intimacy is a turn-on. For others, it's a necessity, as we said, so those without private space, perhaps teenagers fearing discovery, or individuals involved in affairs, they rely on these hidden spots to express intimacy. But the very nature of these lovers' lanes, discreet, shielded, hidden, makes them vulnerable to dark forces. One summer evening in 1988, a young courting couple were parked up in their car in a car park on Fir Tree Lane in Tunbridge Wells. The car park is on the edge of a large common in the town's shadow. During the day it's popular with dog walkers and local shoppers, but after dark it's a favourite spot for young lovers. This particular courting couple were engaged in an intimate act when they noticed a peeping Tom peering through their window. The man, who was wearing a balaclava, was stood mere inches from them, completely motionless, staring at them intently. The couple challenged their onlooker and he soon ran off, but this was just the start for him. In the months that followed, the peeping Tom struck again, each time more brazen than before. On a cold, dark November night in 1988, he was confronted by another courting couple. But instead of fleeing, he seemed to savour the chase, circling the car with an unsettling, almost grotesque Laurel and Hardy absurdity. In the months from June 1988 to January 1989, the so-called peeping Tom had struck around 20 times. So far, thankfully, he hadn't done anything other than look. But in January, in a further escalation of his depravity, he seemed once again to delight in the thrill of the chase, of nearly being caught. As one young man ran after him, the peeping Tom stopped dead and faced him off, taunting him before calmly disappearing into the night. It was clear at this point that this depraved individual was growing significantly in confidence. On this occasion, he tried to open the car door, and luckily for this couple, they had locked it. But this is, you're in a secluded area. It's probably pitch black because there's no roads nearby. There's no houses nearby. That's the whole point of it, that it's secluded and private, it's dark, and you're locked in an intimate embrace with your partner. And then one or both of you all of a sudden notice a man stood inches from you with just a pane of glass to separate you, wearing a balaclava, in camouflage gear. I cannot imagine how frightening this must have been for these couples.
Yeah, I think you hit it nail on the head there, where you said you're like in this intimate mindset, so you don't expect anyone else to be there. You're really in that moment, aren't you? And then suddenly you look to the side and there's someone there. I think, like, when you were describing it then, you did such a good job of building up the atmosphere of it. It almost felt like horror film-esque. It kind of is, isn't it? I kind of was imagining myself in that situation and just thinking that this person's there. And also when he tries the door, like, that's an escalation. As you said, he's getting more confident with that. So where he's going to go to, I'm worried.
And I think, there were about 20 couples that had been targeted up until this point in about an 8-9 month period. And I think, yes, some of them would have confronted this man. Some of them, I can just picture them scrambling to get the key in the ignition and to start the engine and to jump off out of that car park. I can imagine the panic. You can almost taste it. So yeah, I really can picture these people and really feel the fear that they're experiencing. In February 1989, 9 months after the first sighting of the Peeping Tom at the Fir Tree Lane car park, he struck again, and this time with harrowing consequences. As a young courting couple made love in their car in the car park after a few drinks at a local pub, a man opened the front passenger door and trained a single-barrel 12-bore shotgun at the boyfriend's head. He ordered the naked pair to lie face down and secured their hands behind their backs with plastic cable ties. When the boyfriend tried to turn and face him, the man hissed, "Look again and I'll blow your fucking head off." The man then blindfolded the boyfriend and placed a bag over the young woman's head. He then carefully pulled the bag up and kissed the woman on the lips before violently raping her, as her boyfriend screamed for him to stop. The man disappeared only to return a few moments later, before poking the barrel of the shotgun into the woman's side as he made vile threats against her. When he left for good, the couple sought help from a nearby house. I mean, it's just a real level of barbarity that we don't come across very often, that this woman is viciously and violently raped in front of her boyfriend, who is lay there helpless, and it just adds a whole other dimension, I imagine, to that horrific scenario.
Yeah, I think as well, the way you were describing how they were tied up with zip ties, which there's no getting out of them, is there? And then also the thing like the bag over the face, it's so claustrophobic and just impossible to kind of move. It must be so uncomfortable. So I guess this is a slight side note, but it is appropriate. I watched the SAS training, like celebrity SAS thing, and they do this where they put them in stress positions, and a lot of them are with their hands out or behind them and them in like lay down positions on their front. So similar to what you've described. And so whether it was intentional or not, this man has obviously put them in incredibly stressful positions and also in this incredibly stressful environment where they're not going to be able to be thinking straight and these horrible things are going to be happening to them. I mean, the trauma of that in itself is just unthinkable, isn't it?
Completely agree, yeah. I think the fact that they're completely naked as well, and this has happened so out of the blue, so unexpected. Of course it's unexpected. We talked about how frightening it would be for the other couples who managed to get away, how frightening the fear, the panic for them, but for this escalation is so horrific. And yeah, fortunately can only imagine how that felt for them. But yeah, I'd not thought of that. They were in, stress positions there with their hands tied behind their backs. And I kind of think these plastic cable ties almost should be regulated because they are used in so many crimes and they are so proficient in what they do in terms of tying people up. So yeah, there's no getting out of those at all. DNA samples were taken, but there was no match on the national DNA database. And I'm not sure if this was some time after, because obviously DNA was absolutely in its infancy at this point. But periodically over the years, the investigating officers would review the evidence that they had and build a profile of DNA and run it through the database. So I've kind of jumped ahead a bit there, but yeah, the sample wasn't a match in those years that followed. Going back to the immediate aftermath of the horrific rape, in desperation, police turned to Crime Watch in March 1989, so a month after the rape, to appeal for information. A number of couples came forward to say they had encountered a peeping Tom in the area, and police were able to build up a timeline from this testimony. From descriptions, they were certain that it was the same man. He was around 30 years old, of average build, wearing a camouflage jacket and a balaclava, and they could also see the confident escalation in his actions too. But unfortunately, no names were put forward. No solid leads, just witness testimony. There really wasn't a lot to go on. Following the Crime Watch appeal, the attack stopped. Maybe the attacker had gotten spooked by it. Maybe he'd fulfilled his depraved fantasy and was ready to move on with his life. Whatever the case, as far as the police are aware, he never struck again. He was probably a local man, though, walking among them, revelling in the fact that he'd gotten away with his heinous crime. This young woman's life irreparably damaged and changed forever now. Perhaps in the months and years following her attack, she walked past him, sat next to him on a bus perhaps, or stood next to him at the bar of a local pub, without knowing for 1 second that she was stood next to the man who'd raped her. Maybe her attacker saw her and recognised her, wondering whether she would stare into his eyes once again and know it was him. Maybe he got off on that thrill. Either way, he got away with it and continued to live his life as a free man. Until 2004, that is. Up until this point, the evil rapist had lived his life under the radar, careful to ensure he did not commit any further crimes, or at least that he got away with them, for fear of his DNA being taken and matched to his crime in 1989. But then he slipped up. As part of Operation Ore, a major UK police investigation into online child sex abuse material, a man was arrested in Eastbourne for the possession of indecent images of children. A DNA sample was taken, and when this was run through the National DNA Database, ping, it was a match to the 1989 rapist. The man, 48-year-old former soldier David Kirby, initially denied the historic charges put to him. However, he later entered a guilty plea, and in 2005 he was sentenced to 13 years in prison for 2 counts of false imprisonment and 1 count of rape. Justice, or some semblance of it at least, was finally served.
This is a paid advertisement from BetterHelp. World Mental Health Day takes place on the 10th of October, and this year BetterHelp is shining the spotlight on therapists, people who truly make the world a better place. The right therapist can change everything, and BetterHelp has over 12 years of experience in matching people to the right therapist. BetterHelp therapists work according to a strict code of conduct. They are fully qualified in the UK, and yes, they do match you with a therapist and would identify the right therapist for you, but if you're not happy with that match, you can also switch to a different therapist at any time. And with over 30,000 therapists worldwide, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 5 million people globally. And it works with an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 for a live session based on 1.7 million client reviews. So this World Mental Health Day, we are celebrating the therapists who've helped millions of people take a step forward. And if you're ready to find the right therapist for you, BetterHelp can help you start that journey. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/red. That's betterhelp.com/red.
So it's a relatively short case and probably not enough material there, perhaps because it happened so long ago, perhaps because there wasn't actually a court case in the end, because he admitted to the offences at the 11th hour. So there isn't really enough to do a full episode on it. So that's why we have another case that I wanted to talk about with that tenuous link. But it was such an important case that I wanted to talk about because I think we as people, regular people, just go about our lives in a normal way as we should be able to. And these horrific things happen. Sometimes we know about them, sometimes we don't. And they often happen when we least expect them. And there's not really a lot we can do to safeguard ourselves. And I certainly don't want to get into any territory of victim blaming here at all. But I think that the nature of these attacks, the fact that they were so random and unexpected, it makes me live in fear to a certain extent that anything could happen at any time. And I don't know, maybe just talking about that helps. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, kind of at this point, I feel like because there's so much out there that could happen, and obviously the kind of work that we do with the podcast, we talk about it a lot and research it a lot. But I think you're right. Like, talking about it, having those discussions is so important. And I don't know how your audience demographic is in terms of gender, but I know 80% of the listeners for Red Rum are women. And a big reason for that, I've kind of looked into it and asked people, why is it that you engage with true crime this way? And a big reason for it is protecting ourselves. Like, maybe if we know more, maybe if we have more knowledge, then we can. And I know I very occasionally go to an early morning gym session, and the gym's about half an hour from my house. So I drive there. I'm coming out of my house, especially in the winter months when it's dark. I get into my car and I have a little sprint to my car. And then as soon as I'm in it, I lock the doors, which in my head feels a bit excessive because I'm on my street is fine. I'm not in the nicest area, but like nothing that I know of has happened down this street. I don't think anyone's watching me, but I'm like, just in case, I've constantly got that inner monologue in my head going on and trying to constantly see like, how can I protect myself? So I think you're right in terms of just continuing to talk about it and have these conversations is really important.
Yeah, we're very similar demographic. I think 75% of our audience is female. And again, yeah, obviously I've spoken with Bethan about it, and I've spoken to other women who consume true crime. And that is the overriding theme that comes out. And I wouldn't necessarily have guessed that because I'm coming to it from a different place where I don't feel the need necessarily to run to my car and quickly get in and lock the door. So it's a totally different headspace for me. But yeah, it's shocking, but it kind of makes sense. I think you can learn a lot from consuming this type of content. And yeah, there is only so much we can do, though, to keep ourselves safe. But we are probably skewed in how we view the world because of what we do. And I always make a point of trying to, when I'm away from true crime and when I'm not researching a case, I try and consume funny stuff and comic stuff and silly stuff. And I think that, there's no coincidence there. I think it is just to try and cleanse my head of all of this. Otherwise, you'd never leave your home, would you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's where I'm going wrong because my downtime is horror films.
Oh, right. Yeah, this is screwed up. Yeah, similar to Stuart, British Murders, for
yes.
Sure. Yeah,
we're doing a podcast together on horror films, a 10-part series. Yeah, so I knew when I was like, who would want to do this with me? I was like, oh, he's a great option.
Yeah, because I think he started out doing some horror film reviews. His podcast
did he?
Did include some of that in the very early days, I'm sure. So I know he's a fanatic, and obviously so are you. So yeah, has it got a name yet, this new show?
Yeah, it's called The Final Cut, and it comes out at the end of September.
Fantastic. Okay, look out for that, guys. But if you want something funny, maybe don't look out for it.
Yes. Oh, sorry, I just had one question. I don't know if you know the answer about the case, but it was interesting that this guy had a gun. I found, because obviously we're in the UK, they're harder to come by. So I'm wondering, was that was it a military background? Was that to do with that?
Yeah, I think possibly. It was a single-barrel 12-ball shotgun. It was legitimately owned. The police were subsequently able to identify that he did have a license for that in 1989. So he was possibly using it for, I don't know, like hunting, shooting, fishing kind of stuff. So yeah, it was used for legitimate purposes. And I suppose he's operating, I mean, some of it was in the summer, but mostly he was operating in the winter. It's dark, he's got a coat on probably, and it's, despite being probably, 3 foot long at least, it's still relatively easy to conceal that under your coat. And I think it's interesting, did he have that gun with him in some of the other encounters and the couples just didn't notice? Or was that a really dramatic escalation towards the end? And had he really made his mind up in February 1989 that come hell or high water, I'm going to carry this out, whatever happens now? because he had spent so many months building up to it.
Yeah, it surprises me actually that we don't know of more crimes that he's committed, because it's quite rare, isn't it, for someone to do that. And then, I mean, I know he was found out for the child abuse images later on, but anything in between that, I just wonder what's he hiding? What don't we know about?
Agreed. I did have the same thought. I think there probably are other crimes that he's responsible for. I also did think that I know from the research I did on David Fuller that a peeping Tom was active in the area at the time, and that was put down to subsequently that was him, that was David Fuller. So he was active in Tunbridge Wells as a peeping Tom. But I wonder if this guy too was active and not just stalking car parks and lovers' lanes, but also stalking lone women in ground floor flats, from outside with a pair of binoculars. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there are other crimes that are unsolved that could be attributable to him, for sure. Our second case takes us to West London, Shepherd's Bush to be exact. These days its streets form a jarring patchwork. Gleaming luxury apartments and hip gastropubs sit alongside shabby bedsits and the occasional crack den. The grit of the old neighbourhood still clings just beneath the surface, but there's a hum of tension in the air, a quiet battle that rages on between the old world and the new. In recent years, the gentrification of Shepherd's Bush has left it in the throes of an identity crisis, caught between its bohemian past and its more polished present. Do you know Shepherd's Bush, Grace? Am I going to offend you with this?
No, I know it a little bit. My friend Kwame lives there and is from there, and he only has positive things to say about it. But I've been, and I know there's definitely like the two sides. Like there's this kind of gentrified version, as you speak about, and then there's also people just trying to live there. I always feel really sorry for the older people in a gentrified area where they're just trying to go about their days, and suddenly there's like a bagel matcha pop-up shop take over their like local greengrocers or something. And I always feel like, God, it must be so hard to kind of adapt to that and be like, well, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, I think even in the last, from what I know, from the little bit of research I did on it, in the last 20 years, it's changed dramatically. And yeah, you're right. You've got these people that have lived there for generations when property was really cheap there, which it probably isn't now. And yeah, that community spirit, it's not necessarily gone, it's just evolved and it's changed to a different community and it's tailored towards their needs. But does a 90-year-old need a Gale's Bakery? Possibly, possibly not. So yeah, I hope I don't offend anyone with this, but this was just the way that it formulated in my head as a place, being caught between two identities, that original bohemian creative world that now has seen the yummy mummies and the yuppies of old kind of move in, the equivalent of whatever a yuppie is in 2025. So back in the 1980s, yes, Shepherd's Bush was a very different place. So high street markets teemed with life, run-down housing crowded the streets, and its pubs were filled with locals whose families had lived in the area for generations. Poverty simmered too, and crime festered quietly in the shadows. Rough around the edges, yes, but the neighbourhood had a pulse, a raw sense of identity. It thrived on creativity and an unpolished raw authenticity. Shepherd's Bush had a character that wouldn't be tamed. And it was this rebellious individuality, perhaps, that drew 40-year-old German national Christoph Schliack into its orbit. This is a really interesting case, and one in the same way as the previous case we've just covered, one that I first encountered on an episode of Crime Watch. It was December 1989. I didn't watch it when it was out. I might have done, I might not remember that. But yeah, just on YouTube I've come across it, and it was a case that really stuck with me for many reasons, for reasons that will perhaps become clearer as we go through it. Born on the 22nd of July in 1949 in Hanover, Germany, Christoph Schliack was raised in a middle-class family that had fled post-war Berlin. Openly gay and yearning for a more tolerant society, Christoph relocated to London and eventually settled in Shepherd's Bush in around 1980. There he became a well-known local figure, his eccentric personality and distinctive appearance making him almost impossible to ignore. There was something magnetic yet slightly unsettling about Christoph Schliack. Tall and slightly rotund, he was an imposing figure on the streets of 1980s Shepherd's Bush. Wearing his trademark three-piece suit, which he teamed with colourful bow ties, and sporting a monocle and a pocket watch, he commanded attention wherever he went. Indeed, he had several nicknames among the locals, including the Prince of Shepherd's Bush, the Kaiser, and the Baron. Some people speculated that Christoph had descended from ancient German nobility, a rumour that he himself no doubt stirred. Although a trained barrister, Christoph never practised law. After 5 years of training, he was called to the bar, but rumours circulated that his eccentricity, his harsh German accent and homosexuality barred him from pursuing a career in the profession. Although homosexuality had been decriminalised in England in 1967, societal prejudice lingered, and by the late 1980s, the Tories were moving to restrict LGBTQ+ visibility once again, this time by introducing Section 28 in 1988, which forbade schools from promoting same-sex relationships. Additionally, post-war prejudice towards German nationals still lingered in the decades following World War II. And consequently, Christoph couldn't practice as a barrister, so he found work as a sub-editor at Butterworth's, a legal publisher in central London. There he contributed to Halsbury's Laws of England, a comprehensive and authoritative legal reference. Christoph was incredibly intelligent. Alongside his legal training, he also had a degree in classical Chinese, and he was actively interested in the arts too, particularly in ancient literature. But beneath this veneer of intelligence and eccentric charm lurked a darker, more secretive side. Christoph Schliak was an alcoholic, a fact whispered about among his colleagues at Butterworth's. Afternoons often found him vanishing at a moment's notice, citing feigned ailments, though the truth was far less innocent. He was drawn almost irresistibly to the dimly lit corners of his local pub, where drink and escape intertwined. There he could be himself, at home amongst the eclectic crowd of the White Horse, where he was known to sit beside the fruit machine, drinking pint after pint of German lager, often on his own, lost in thought or whatever classic he happened to be reading at the time. Christoph Schliak was a curious contradiction of a man, at ease alone yet quietly craving connection. He hid behind his eccentric wardrobe, choosing to show the world a carefully curated character, the flamboyant extrovert that belied his true self. Not many people got to know the real Christoph Schliak. He was a complex man, and beneath the mask he was vulnerable too, as the events of Monday the 18th of September 1989 would all too brutally reveal. That morning, Christoph came round in his run-down one-bedroom flat on Coverdale Road in Shepherd's Bush, feeling his head thump in time with his racing heart. The previous night's excesses were catching up with him, just in time for work. Christoph dragged himself onto the tube and made his way to his office on the Strand in central London. At his desk, he downplayed his weekend to his colleagues and got to work editing a legal bankruptcy paper. And I really wanted to put this in about downplaying your weekend, because I know I've been guilty of this in the past. I've presented a particular persona to work colleagues of this sensible, normal person. Now I am that person, but in my 20s in particular, there would be crazy weekends and I would still be paying the price for those weekends on Monday, Tuesday. And I'd be really careful to curate this image of having had a quiet weekend and I'm a quiet person, and I wouldn't want them to have any hint that maybe I'd gone out and got hammered and got in at 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday and therefore might not be as productive today or whatever. So I was always really careful with it. Have you ever had that persona at work? I mean, you're an actress, Grace, aren't you, as well? So you kind of have to do that.
Yeah, for the first 10 years of my career, I mainly worked in theatre, and there is such a culture of going out and having a drink or a couple of drinks after work. I guess like my dad would have done when he was at work like 30, 40 years ago. You just went to the pub on a lunchtime, didn't you? But I mean, you don't do that in theatre, but it comes to the end of the day and everyone's like, oh yeah, should we go out for a drink? Should we go out for a drink? But I got my first acting job. I was at the end of my drama school training, so I was fresh out, like university age. I was fresh out. I didn't really drink a lot. So everyone was going out. I was like, oh yeah, this is great. I'll join. Could not handle my alcohol. Could not handle like the next day. As you said, like trying to promote that version of yourself that is sensible and serious about this job and all of that sort of stuff, whilst also really battling the worst hangover or just that kind of that feeling of, oh, I definitely had one too many last night. And that was kind of constant. I think especially my first job, it was a big drinky cast and a lot of people would go out quite often. And I felt like I had to keep up with them. And then as I've gotten older, similar to you, I have become more sensible. And now, I mean, I don't really drink anymore, so it's not an issue for me. But I think even if I did, I'd just be a bit more sensible about it. But it must be, I mean, I'm getting the sense that we're going to talk about a very awful person. But at this point, I'm thinking he's obviously struggling with alcohol addiction disease. That's a very, very obviously complex and difficult thing to deal with. And actually, I feel incredibly sorry for him that he's having to deal with this in a time where it wasn't spoken about. Like, I'm sure it wouldn't have been referred to as a disease. I'm sure it would have just been referred to someone who really likes alcohol or is addicted or whatever. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens. Also, really, really recognizing that you spoke about how charismatic and charming he is. And we see this all the time with people who then go on to do something really horrible. Sometimes they think they can just get out of it. They can just kind of say the right things. And I imagine with his relationship to alcohol, he probably gets to a point where he's had so much where he really does believe that he can just say whatever he wants and everything will be okay.
Well, you may be surprised because I've led us down a certain path, and we're gonna go down a different path with this. So yeah, you may be surprised how this one turns out. I too really felt for him with regard to his alcoholism, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, in 1989, that wouldn't have been regarded as a disease; it would have been seen as an indulgence. And I talk a bit later on in this case about him burying, something, using alcohol to bury some kind of pain deep within him. And this is a man who was alive at a time when being gay was illegal, back at home in Germany, but also in the UK, not long after he moved here, it had only just been decriminalised. And there was a lot of prejudice. And I just think that must have been such a difficult time to be alive for him. And I think that was a large part of why he adopted this persona of, I will be the extrovert and I will be in your face and I will make you notice me because I'm in a bit more control of the situation then, rather than you will find me out and I'm not in control of it. So I think there was an element of that. But yeah, we'll go on to hear a bit more about him, and apologies for leading everybody down that path because that's not where we go in. So yeah, Christoph had dragged himself into work. It was a Monday. By lunchtime, though, in a move that I'm sure many of us can relate to, he'd had enough. So feigning illness once again, he hot-footed it back to Shepherd's Bush, and this time into the Bush pub, where he ordered a pint before sliding into his usual seat and settling in for an afternoon binge. After an hour or two, Christoph was joined by an old acquaintance. The two chatted for a while before he moved on to the neighbouring White Horse pub. That was his favourite. There he ordered a steak sandwich along with what was probably pint number 4 or 5 now. So I'm going to take us there in real time now. So it's 5 o'clock. By rights, Christoph Schliak should be heading home from work now. Instead, he's feeling merrily intoxicated, cocooned in the familiarity and warmth of his local boozer. As Christoph sits at his usual table next to the fruit machine in the White Horse pub, the clock is ticking on his life. But of course he doesn't know that. In less than 5 hours, he'll be dead, stabbed 23 times in his own home by a man he thought he could trust. Not long after he finishes his steak sandwich, Christoph is joined by 2 men, one in his mid-20s with dark hair, a soft Irish accent, and a confident, almost arrogant glint in his eye. The other man in his 50s, also Irish, but with an unsettling, rather anxious demeanour. The 3 men sit and drink together, and the hours pass by in a haze of raucous laughter and heated debate. Christoph repeatedly goes to the bar to get the drinks in. A pint of his favourite German lager for himself, a Guinness for the old man, and a vodka and coke for the cocky, confident fella. The drinks flow and so does the banter. At one point, Christoph appears to take offence at something the younger man has said, but in their drunken stupor, all is soon forgotten and Christoph once again heads to the bar to get the drinks in. The men Christoph is drinking with aren't well known to the pub crowd in Shepherd's Bush, which has a thriving Irish community at this time. But their behaviour that night doesn't go unnoticed, particularly when the younger of the two gets into an argument with another local over who is next in line at the pool table. This brash, entitled behaviour would prove to be his downfall in the months that followed this eventful night. By 9:30 p.m, having spent the best part of 8 hours drinking, Christoph is now ready for bed. In his inebriated state, however, he invites his newfound friends back to his flat for a nightcap. On the way there, the trio stop off at an off-licence where Christoph buys cigarettes and cider for himself and his companions. Back at the flat, the older gentleman soon leaves. The younger man, who says his name is Sam, remains. He and Christoph share some of the cider. Sam knows that Christoph is gay. Indeed, he's been flirting with him a little during the course of the evening, leading him on even, hinting for an invite back to his flat. But it isn't sex on his mind, it's robbery. Not content with cadging drinks off Christoph all night, Sam wants more. Cold, hard cash. Or jewellery, anything that is of value. Up until this point, Christoph had seemed like the perfect mark. Expensively dressed, knowledgeable about fine art, generous. This rich queer, as the young gentleman would later refer to him as, must have money. Unfortunately not. And that becomes patently obvious as soon as Sam arrives at his flat. It's messy and dirty, slightly chaotic. It doesn't scream money. It screams desperation. This is the flat of an alcoholic, a man who spends all of his money blocking out a secret pain that is buried so deep, even he doesn't know where it comes from. Sam's disappointed, gutted. A few free drinks is nice, but he was hoping for a payday, and that's not going to happen now. A few minutes pass and Sam wakes up on Christoph's sofa. As he comes round, he sees a naked Christoph heading towards him. In a panic, he grabs a knife and plunges it into Christoph's neck. A red rainbow of blood spurts out of Christoph's severed jugular vein and onto the bare walls of his sad flat. With this sudden loss of blood and a lack of oxygen now getting to his brain, Christoph struggles to make out what is actually happening here. His instincts eventually take over and he scrambles to get away, bashing into his tatty furniture as he attempts to flee his crazed attacker. But Sam isn't about to let him get away. Knife in hand, he stabs Christoph repeatedly. It's a vicious, brutal and bloody attack, and it's quick too. In less than a minute, Christoph has collapsed onto the sofa, where he bleeds out and takes his last breath, his dignity cruelly stripped as he lies there naked, contorted, a mass of flesh and blood. And I mean, it's a really graphic picture that I'm painting there. And I feel bad for saying, this is a sad flat with tatty furniture and it's chaotic, but it was. And I just want to get that truth out there that Christoph presented to the world this appearance of a well-dressed, well-groomed man. And then behind closed doors, that the chaos showed itself to whoever he chose to show it to or not show it to. So he was in control of that public persona, but behind closed doors, it was a very different story that emerged of chaos and quite sadness, really.
Yeah, and it's the truth, isn't it? I mean, we all know people like that. I know myself when I've gone through times of, I don't know, like maybe depression when I've lost someone or times where I'm just not quite myself. And I know the first thing to go is my immediate surrounding environment. And I would hate for someone to come in and see it because probably as soon as I leave that house, I'm trying to put on my best self and trying to make people believe that I'm okay because you don't want to talk about it or you don't, maybe in Christopher's case, he doesn't necessarily know he's got an alcohol issue and maybe doesn't want to converse about that. But I think with you kind of describing it the way you did and also the murder, it really struck me how Christopher wouldn't have known what was going on. And I think you said the word confused, or he had confusion. And I think that's so apparent that would be happening, because when you're in that state of being that drunk, the last thing you're thinking is this awful thing's going to happen. But even when it is, you probably, even if you were sober, you probably couldn't quite compute it. So then add on 8 hours of drinking or however long, it must just have been completely, just didn't make any sense to him. And I'm wondering what was going through his mind at that point. And also I'm wondering where Sam, so he calls himself, got that knife from, because it seems like he just like whipped it out of nowhere. So I wonder, do you know, was it just lying around? Was it?
I think it was. I think it was a tiny little flat. I think the kitchen and the living room were one and the same, and it was. I think it was a bread knife. They weren't 100% sure, the forensic pathologists, the exact type of knife, but they did speculate that it could be a bread knife. So just, you know, one edge bladed and serrated, and it was a long knife as well. So I think, I think we've only got Sam's word on this, and I'll go into it in a bit more detail, but you know, we don't know whether Christoph did appear to be trying it on with Sam, this so-called Sam, or whether he just said that. There were, you know, number of versions of events that presented themselves. I won't go into all of them, but one of them was Sam saying he feared he was going to be raped by Christoph. And I don't buy that. Based on what we go on to learn about Sam and his temperament, this kind of has his name all over it. You know, he didn't need any provocation really to do this.
Well, even the way he's describing the scene and what happened, he doesn't, in that version that you've just told us, he sees Christopher coming over to him naked, allegedly, but he doesn't even talk about that progressing to something where he's forcing himself on him, or it screams to me gay panic defense of like nothing. There's no legitimate anything underneath that. Yeah,
100%. Christoph's colleagues weren't all too surprised when he didn't turn up for work the next day. This wasn't particularly uncommon for him. What was uncommon, however, was the lack of contact from him that day. Christoph never went AWOL. Although he was somewhat unreliable, he at least always made sure to inform his superiors that he would be absent. With no call forthcoming that day and no sign of Christoph in his usual haunts of Shepherd's Bush, the police were called and a welfare check was arranged for that evening. When police arrived at Christoph's flat, there was no answer and the door was locked. They made inquiries with a neighbour who informed them that they'd heard Christoph return home the previous night, possibly with someone. The neighbour said he'd heard a loud thud about half an hour later. He wasn't overly concerned though and passed it off as Christoph returning home drunk, a common occurrence in his world. Police were concerned enough to put a ladder up to his first floor living room window though. When they peered through a gap in the curtains, they saw the true horror of the previous night's events in all of their brutal glory. The scene was immediately cordoned off and forensics were called in. When officers finally got into Christoph's flat, he was pronounced dead from 6 feet away at 9:05 p.m. Such was the viciousness of this attack. They didn't even need to get any further to say, yeah, he's gone. And yeah, you know, a very sad end to a somewhat sad life. And I feel harsh for saying that, as I've said, but I feel there was so much potential with him. He was a genius, a real character, somebody who fell victim to alcoholism. He was only 40 years old. He could have met a kind person who just got him, someone who helped him get better. He could have had a very different second half of his life, one filled with love and acceptance as the world moved on. And I just felt so sad for him that he died in the most brutal circumstances, but at the kind of halfway point of his life, and he could have had another 40 years. He would have seen the world change and move. He could have found love and companionship that deep down he did want, and that acceptance. And I felt so sad that it was so brutally taken away from him. In the weeks following Christoph's murder, police hit one brick wall after another. All they knew was that Christoph had last been seen drinking at the White Horse pub with 2 Irish men who weren't known to the locals there. The men could have been anyone, and they could be anywhere now. Although the older man was not complicit in the murder, he was friends with Sam, the younger guy. Surely he knew what went down that night after he left Christoph's flat. As far as the police were concerned, finding out his true identity was as important as finding out who Sam really was. But they were no closer to finding either of them now than they'd been at the very beginning. Detectives asked around in local pubs and chased dead ends, and eventually, in desperation, they turned to BBC's Crime Watch in December of 1989, 3 months after the murder, to appeal for help. While no credible leads were forthcoming from these shores, a Garda in Ireland watched the appeal and made contact with the incident room. He had heard rumours that a local criminal named Kenneth Hamilton had been going around boasting about killing a German man in Shepherd's Bush. Apparently, Hamilton was trying to get in with a gang of armed robbers and was trying to prove his criminal prowess. At last, the police had a name. They did some digging and found out that Hamilton had escaped from Mountjoy Prison in Ireland, where he'd been serving a sentence for a firearms-related offence before fleeing to London in the months before Christoph Schliach was murdered. Hamilton had returned to his native Ireland in the days following Christoph's murder, where he was eventually returned to custody. Met police officers came to question him, and while he spoke carefully, his non-verbal tics gave him away. When Christoph Schliach's name was mentioned, Hamilton visibly flinched. The game was up. It was now just a matter of proving it. Police had recovered a DNA sample from the crime scene that didn't belong to Schliach and which they were certain was the killer's. So all they needed now was a DNA sample to either rule him in or out. But at the moment he's in Ireland, they're going to have to extradite him, and they can't do that unless they've got more of a case. So the police are in a really tricky situation here. They're pretty certain it's him. And you see it in the reconstruction. So that there's a reconstruction of Christoph's murder and some of the aftermath of that. But there was a special Crime Watch episode where once the case had been solved, they really dive into how they solved it. And it's part documentary, part dramatised. And in some of the dramatic reconstructions, you see this police interview take place where two British officers have gone out to Ireland to interview Hamilton, and they mention Christoph Schliach's name and the circumstances around his death. And the actor does a great job. You know, you see him flinch, and it's so subtle, but it's also so obvious at the same time that something's going on here. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it sounds it. I think what really struck out to me as well was that he is his own undoing. The only reason that this ever came to was because he was bragging about it. So I can't imagine he really thought he did something that was that wrong, or if he did, because surely everyone knows murder is wrong, but maybe he just thought, like, there's no way that they're going to tie this back to me. Or maybe he just wasn't even thinking about it. Like, some of the things that he does, it just seems he's not thinking about the larger picture. I mean, the fact that he escaped from prison as well, that doesn't really happen anymore, does it? I've just done a case that went out today, and it was about someone who escaped from prison twice on 2 different occasions. I was like, wait, this feels so almost like a movie. Or a film. It doesn't feel real. So yeah, I think he's obviously not thinking about the bigger picture. He's just like, I'm just going to do whatever I want right now and just see what happens.
And I also think, had he not been so arrogant at the pub on the night that he was drinking with Christoph, he wouldn't have been as noticeable, as recognisable, because the police obviously went to that pub. They didn't really get any solid leads, but people remembered Sam from that evening. They didn't really remember the older gentleman so much because he was quieter, but they remembered Sam because he was making a nuisance of himself and nearly getting into fights, and that meant that they could give descriptions of him, and those descriptions obviously matched with Hamilton, you know, when they go and see him. So yeah, he was his own undoing, absolutely. When police finally tracked down the older gentleman that Hamilton had been with on the night of Christoph's murder, a man named Daniel Hogan, who was actually Hamilton's stepfather, they finally had enough evidence to extradite Hamilton back to England to face charges. So Daniel Hogan, Hamilton's stepfather, told the police everything. How the two had gone out with the intention of skanking drinks off someone that night. I couldn't think of another word other than cadging, so I went with skanking. That's what we used to say at school. I mean, I don't know if there are other words for that.
I've never heard that, but I totally got what you mean.
I think it's a Brummy thing, skanking drinks. He also said how Hamilton had confessed to killing Christoph Schliach when he made a sexual advance towards him, according to Hamilton. He said how Hamilton had cut his hand badly with the knife when it slipped mid-attack, and he'd gone to him for help. And what's more, Hogan said he would be willing to testify against his stepson. He was scared of his stepson, and police really worked with him and said, look, with your testimony, we can put him away and you will be safe and you won't have to live in fear of him anymore. So there was a real, despite the age difference here, there was a real power dynamic in Hamilton's favour. He was only in his mid-20s, his stepfather's in his 50s, and you sort of get the impression that Hamilton, he's not long moved over to England, probably doesn't know that many people, doesn't have many friends, probably not the kind of person that can make friends and keep them. So he sort of drags Daniel Hogan out, his stepfather, with him, probably against his will a little bit. So yeah, I think Hogan would have been quite relieved to think, actually, yeah, let's get him behind bars and I won't have to deal with him again.
Yeah, I think it's quite a bold and brave thing to do, even with that that kind of offer from the police, because we know that Hamilton potentially had these gang links as well, or was looking into kind of that way of life. So there's no saying what could have happened from behind bars. So I think that's a really brave thing for him to do.
And there's no guarantee either, is there? The police are wanting to build a case for the CPS to take on, and they're hopeful that they're going to win. However, that might not happen, and then Hamilton's released, and he stood there in the dock as you've given evidence against him. He then is potentially found not guilty and comes straight for you. This man is a psychopath. So, yeah, it was incredibly brave. And Daniel Hogan, although was there on the night, and some of his testimony, some of it contradicts itself. At one point, he says he did go back to the flat, and then he says he didn't go back to the flat. I think he did go back to the flat, but I think Hamilton said, look, get out of here. I'm going to rob him. I don't need you here messing anything up. So I think he probably did go back to the flat, but he wasn't complicit in any of it really, other than, I don't know, maybe he was aware of what Hamilton was looking to do in terms of robbing Schliach, but certainly not in terms of killing him. And this was a really bad wound to his hand that Hamilton had done when he was stabbing Christoph Schliach. The knife had literally, there was so much blood, the knife had slipped as he gripped it, and his hand went and gripped the blade, and he did need hospital treatment for that, and he managed to pass it off as an injury that had occurred in a different way.
Wow, it really, the involvement with his stepfather and everything you've just said, it does make me further question Hamilton's version of events, because I remember in your initial kind of recount, he said that he'd fallen asleep and then woke up to Christoph coming towards him. And I just think, like, if your goal is to rob someone, why are you falling asleep before? Yeah. It doesn't make sense, does it?
None of it makes sense, really. And I think at one point, Hamilton said that Christoph had the knife in his hand and he feared that Christoph was... I mean, it's just utter bullshit. He's just talking utter shit. I mean, we don't know what actually happened, but I certainly don't think Christoph was making sexual advances towards him. He may have misread the signals because Hamilton was absolutely leading him on in that way. So he may have misread the signals, but I think what it was, Hamilton got back to that flat. Christoph presents as someone else externally, as this rich, generous, knowledgeable man, and then you go back to this bedsit, that's kind of quite depraved, and he's thinking, oh, fucking hell, that was a waste of a night. Yeah, I've had a few free drinks, but that's where it's going to stop now. And I think in a fit of rage, when he really ascertains that Christoph has no money for him, I think that's when he just loses his temper with him, because as far as he's concerned, he's invested hours in this and it's going to come to nothing. So I think it was pure anger on his part that resulted in him killing Christoph Schliach. When police brought Hamilton back to these shores, they took hair samples from him and matched the profile to the blood found at the crime scene. They also identified a distinctive shirt the killer had worn during the attack, and the DNA matched the blood on this shirt. Built a DNA profile and they matched that with Hamilton. I said that so eloquently. But it was a cut and dried case now, so Hamilton was going down for this. When the case came to court in May 1991, the defence presented Hamilton's version of events to the jury, so that version that he'd been defending himself from unwanted sexual advances. There was no proof for that. Hamilton was described by those who knew him as a madman, a dangerous psychopath with an extremely violent streak. So while it may have been true, that Christoph had misread the signs, it was equally, if not more likely, that Hamilton had killed him in a fit of rage upon finding out that there was no money for him at this flat. Whatever the truth, the jury bought Hamilton's version, unfortunately. His lawyer successfully argued that he'd acted in self-defence. It's shocking. This is truly shocking. The police were so fucked off with this in the Crime Watch documentary that was done because they said there were 23 stab wounds. So somebody acting in self-defence might stab someone once or twice. They probably wouldn't even stab them because that's quite an intimate thing to do if you don't really have those sort of killer genes within you. But to stab him 23 times when actually, this was an attack that went on for about a minute. Christoph was stumbling around his flat, incapacitated, and Hamilton was still going for him and stabbing him when Hamilton could have easily escaped at this point. So the police couldn't understand how the jury had bought this version from Hamilton's defence, that this was purely an act of self-defence. So, shockingly, the murder charge was dropped and Hamilton was convicted of manslaughter. So he received 6 years for that and was out in 3.5 years. So you can only imagine the fear for Daniel. It's just truly shocking.
I wonder if, did you say this was 1989? Yeah, I wonder if, do you think there's something to do there with like being gay and the kind of, because it's hard to grow up gay now, but 30 years ago, my goodness, I can't even begin to imagine. And using that as a kind of defence and the prejudice that the jury or the bias that the jury might have had that seems to have potentially played into that.
Yeah, and I think there was a narrative that all gay men are predatory, particularly towards heterosexual men. And I think some with how things were at the time, some of the jury probably could put themselves in Hamilton's version of events and would think, there's no way I'm going to stand for that. I'd do anything to avoid that happening to get out of there. So, I think you're absolutely right, The legend of Christoph Schliach lives on, with some saying his ghost haunts the old pubs of Shepherd's Bush. Whether you believe that is up to you. What we know for certain, though, is that Christoph Schliach was a true gentleman whose presence in this world made it a far richer place. As I said, it just really resonated with me, this, and maybe because I'm a similar age, and I just thought, he had half his life ahead of him. He'd lived half of it. All things being well, he'd had half his life to go, and I think things would have got better for him. And I like to think that, maybe I'm romanticising it, but I love to think that maybe he would have got a grip on his alcoholism and sorted that out and met the love of his life and continued to live in Shepherd's Bush and be there now, moaning about Gale's Bakery on the high street, having taken over a lovely independent bakery that was once there. So I don't know, but it's that's how he lives on in my world, certainly.
That's such a lovely way to look at it. I think when someone is lost at such a young age, as you say, like often their story ends there and that's it. But thinking about like what he would be like now and the way you built him up as a person. I know I mentioned like early on what I tried to do with Red Rum in terms of being victim focused, and you did that so much that we got such an indication of who Christoph was and where he came from and his whole backstory, that thinking about where he would be at now, although it's kind of bittersweet because he's not here, and of course that's incredibly tragic and sad, but thinking about who he could have been is also, that's such a lovely thing to do as well, I think.
And you feel that loss, I think, even more. So, two very different cases, both from 1989, both featured on Crime Watch, but very different from each other, certainly. So thank you so much, Grace, for coming along. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been so interesting to learn about cases which I'd never heard of them. And I do think like Crime Watch is so great for that, for finding the cases where maybe there's not a huge amount of online coverage, because I don't know about you, Mark, but I do all of my research online, absolutely 100% of it. So I'm finding things that come up in the news or things that are like really forefront of Google or news archives or whatever it might be. But cases like both of the cases that you've told today, I feel like I'm not likely to come across those. So I'm quite sure that a lot of my listeners wouldn't have heard of this. I'm sure the same with your listeners. So it's been incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, don't forget to check out Red Rum, everybody, if you're not already a fan. And also at the end of September, Grace and Stuart's new podcast. What was it called again?
The Final Cut.
The Final Cut. I'll be checking it out. I do really struggle with horror films and get really scared, as our audience knows. So I will definitely listen, but I can't guarantee I'm going to see it through to the end without crying through fear. So we shall see. But I do look forward to that for sure. So great stuff. Okay, thank you. And thank you for listening, everybody. We will be back next week with another episode. So we will see you then.